I'm home base at, and okay. All righty. So you'll let me know now, because usually people just come right in, but that's why I've been waiting room because we wanted to just touch base. Is there anything else we need, Barbie?
I think I'm good too. And I think I can raise my hand I'm going to try when we get close to the 15 minutes from the end. So we have time for Q&A.
Okay, solid. That sound good, Dr. Johnson?
Oh yeah, I'm good. I'm just flowing. Just
Okay.
tell me what I need to do.
Okay.
All righty. And
I'm
then
good.
I'm going to share in the chat. This was like a little form we had that we're going to ask people to fill out just to give us their information to know who, came on board. So we just need to copy and paste it each of the sessions and maybe throughout and ask people to complete. It's pretty simple. Hey, Gabby. All right. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna bring
Good morning. Thank you all.
No problem. Oh, you went on mute real quick.
And if I can't raise my hand, and I might not be able to as a co-host, I'm just going to talk and I'll let you know when we're getting close to the end.
Okay, all good. We're all yours, Barbie.
Okay. And do you want me to pin you? I guess I'll pin. Yeah.
And how's my audio now?
Sounds good.
Okay, good. All right.
There we go. Good morning. My name is Barry Gold. I'm from Beth Israel, and it is my great honor this morning to introduce Dr. Andre E. Johnson, the senior pastor of Gifts of Life Ministries, an inner city church built on servant leadership philosophy. He's married to Lisa Jones Johnson, owner of For Peaceful Resolutions, a conflict mediation company. In his called-centered, mission group-oriented servant leadership church, he leads a congregation that focuses on the Word of God in the feeding of the hungry, healing and deliverance of the sick and oppressed, clothing the naked, welcoming the stranger, visiting the prison-bound, educating the unlearned, and loving the unloved. Dr. Johnson also leads a socially conscious and socially relevant ministry. He and Gifts of Life have been at the forefront of much of the social justice activism in Memphis, Tennessee. Grounded in his faith and call to ministry, it is not uncommon to see Dr. Johnson leading, organizing, and participating in protests, vigils, marches, boycotts, and other direct social actions. His faith has led him to participate in efforts to reform our prison system, economic and poverty issues such as Fight for 15, and living wage initiatives, police misconduct and brutality issues, and issues surrounding race. He was also one of the lead activists in #TakeHimDown901, the successful effort to remove Confederate statues in the city of Memphis, public safety initiatives, and the lead organizer with the Free Purvis Pain Coalition. He is currently partnering with many activists and organizations surrounding the death of Tyre Nichols at the hands of the Memphis Police Department. In addition to his work in the church and community, Dr. Johnson is the Benjamin W. Rollins Professor of Communication at the University of Memphis and a visiting scholar at Memphis Theological Seminary. His research focuses on the intersection of rhetoric, race, religion, African American public address, the Black church, and social movements. Dr. Johnson is the author of many books. One, The Forgotten Prophet, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner and the African American Prophetic Tradition, which came out in 2012. And with Amanda Nell Edgar, The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, 2018, both winning National Book Awards. His book, No Future in This Country, The Prophetic Pessimism of Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, 2020, won both the Religious Communication Association and the African American Communication and Culture Division's Top Book Award in 2021. His latest books are The Speeches of Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, The Press, the Platform, and the Pulpit, 2023, and Preaching in a Pandemic, The Rhetoric of the Black Church, 2023, with Kimberly Johnson and Wallace Baxter. His Summer of 2020, George Floyd and the Resurgence of the Black Lives Matter Movement, again with Amanda Nell Edgar, is due for publication in 2024. In addition to what many consider groundbreaking work on Bishop Turner, Dr. Johnson maintains an eclectic research agenda. Ongoing research projects explore the nexus between rhetoric and preaching, theology, religion, and politics, the religious oratory of the colored conventions, Black Lives Matter, and more recently, Sister Souljah and the rhetoric of hip hop. He has earned top paper awards in national, regional, and state academic conferences, and he is in great demand, so we are very lucky to have him as a preacher, lecturer, social justice activist, and workshop leader. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Andre E. Johnson.
That was a wonderful, thank you for that wonderful introduction that I did not think would be read in its entirety. That's fun. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. I need to thank the Reverend Carolyn Cavanagh for inviting me to come and to just share with you briefly about these civil rights acts. And I would say from the outset that I am not a lawyer, but I do study rhetoric and argumentation. And as I delve into this for this presentation on today, I am more convinced now than ever, as you would hear, that a lot of rhetoric went on in shaping these bills that became law, that became constitutional, and had to be done all over again with the amendments and all the other stuff. So I just want to share with you briefly. We will have time for some Q&A because I think that that can allow me to kind of unpack some stuff, because this is just an overview, a cursory of the Civil Rights Act from like 1866. And I'm not going to cover all of them. So from 1866 all the way up to 1964. To understand the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we have to briefly take a look at the other Civil Rights Act throughout the history of this country. Seeing that Southern states were not going to abide by the spirit of Reconstruction after the Civil War, Congress passed the 1866 Civil Rights Act, enacted on April 9th, 1866, after Congress overrode, by the way, a veto from President Johnson at the time. It has the distinction of being the first federal law to, quote, define citizenship and to declare all citizens are equally protected by the law. Legal theorist G. Edward White argued that the text of the Civil Rights Acts of 1866 intended to use the enforcement powers of Congress to alter the treatment of emancipated African American in former enslaved states. Section 1 of the Act declared that all persons born in the United States were citizens of the United States without regard to any previous condition of slavery or involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted. The Act also declared that citizens were able to enjoy the full and equal benefit of all the laws and proceedings for the security of the person and property as enjoyed by, quote, white citizens. Opponents of this act did not like its egalitarian nature, as you can imagine, and almost immediately, many southern states especially began to nullify the spirit of the act. According to the act, Black citizens had the same rights as white citizens in every state and territory in the United States and overrode any Black codes to the contrary. You see, the 1866 Civil Rights Bill and Act was a response to the Black codes that was happening in Southern states after emancipation. For many people in the South, making Black people citizens was just a step too far. Opponents argued that Congress did not have the power to declare anyone a citizen, arguing that citizenship was a state action. They also argued that the act did not spell out the meaning of civil rights and immunities. In any case, many Americans dismissed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. States continued to deny Black people the rights and privileges of the act aimed at protecting. Therefore, African Americans had to contend with the continued destruction of their property and, yes, even their lives. So, to address these issues, the nullification of the 1866 Civil Rights Act, Congress decided to broaden the category of national citizenship and to further limit the state's power to restrict the rights of citizens. So remember, the argument was that states did not have a right to declare anyone a citizen. Well, Congress said, okay, by passing and ratifying the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, they first extended the category of citizenship to include all people. We know this now as birthright citizenship, specifically for Native Americans as well. Second, they made state citizenship and national citizenship equal to each other. Third, they limited states in restricting the rights of individuals. States could not make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. And states could not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection laws. Now, not to just stand on that alone, Congress decided to also add, because people were saying at the time, well, what about voting? Okay, 15th Amendment, ratified 2 years later, February 3rd, 1870, guaranteed that the right of citizens of the United States, at that time, men over the age of 21, to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. With this addition, the Constitution took on a new look and meaning. You see, for the first time, the Constitution defined citizenship and offered the right to vote. The hope was that with birthright citizenship and the right to vote, African Americans could now protect themselves from their former enslavers through the rule of law and elect leaders that they supported. Now, each state still had opportunities to say what constituted an elector or a voter in each one of the states. So men, each one, were selected. However, discrimination still went unabated. So, okay. After the passage of the 14th, the 15th, on March 1st, 1875, to respond to the 1872 Amnesty Act, which actually is quite important today, and hopefully we can talk about it in the Q&A. To respond to the Amnesty Act of 1872, March 1, 1875, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which stated that all persons within the jurisdiction of the United States are entitled to public accommodations, regardless of race and color or previous condition of servitude. The law made it a crime for anyone to facilitate the denial of such accommodations or services on the basis of color, race, or previous condition of servitude. All lawsuits arising under the level of the Civil Rights Act were to be tried in federal court rather than in the state level. The passage of the bill was a culmination of hard work and protracted debate for support. For Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, it was a monumental and monumentous victory. He had labored hard for this passage. He urged Congress to quickly move to pass this bill. In one editorial, for instance, Turner wrote, "Failure is our failure, and its success is our success. Indeed, it holds in its grasp our destiny as a race. Stand or fall in that bill." In a prophetic utterance, Turner even tied the passage to the bill to a move of God. Should it fail, I shall regard it as the indignant proclamation of heaven, saying, "Arise and depart, for this is not your home, for this is a white man's death." But if it succeeds, he'll give it as the voice of God saying to the Negro, "Awake from your lethargy and build schools and churches and houses and prepare to run the race of life where you are." He concluded the editorial by reminding his readers, every man in this country who is opposed to the Civil Rights Bill is opposed to the colored race. And if President Grant is opposed to his passage, then he is our enemy. Yes, the deadly enemy of the colored race. Criticized members of Congress who planned to attend a tribute to the late Charles Sumner, who presented the bill in the Senate to begin with. Wondering if Congress would actually go through with a memorial service with the Civil Rights Bill hanging over their heads. For you see, Senator Sumner had passed away before the bill was actually made into law. Turner wrote, if Sumner could shake off the cements of the grave and speak, his lion-like voice would utter in fearful intonation, "Mention not my name in Congress till you pass the civil rights." Americans initially saw this as the final piece needed to ensure equality in America. However, conservatives immediately began to resist the law. According to historian John Hope Franklin, proprietors of hotels, saloons, restaurants, and other businesses closed or actually surrendered their public licenses and became private entities. And the national government moved away from civil rights, African Americans began to feel the worst. Their fear became a reality in 1883, just 8 years later, when the Supreme Court declared by 8-1 margin that the Civil Rights Act of 1875 was unconstitutional. Writing for the majority, Justice Bradley, adopting a narrow, literal reading of the 14th Amendment, argued that since the amendment prohibited discrimination action only by the state and not by individuals, there were limits on congressional authority. It limited actions by the state and not by individuals. While some African-American leaders after the decision called for patience and understanding through interviews, essays, letters to the editor of speeches, Bishop Turner called the decision death dealing and argued that the bill not only desensitized African-Americans, but also placed them as a permanent underclass. Turner further argued that the decision merits no moderate talk, that it should be branded, battle axe, sawed, cut, and carved with the most bitter epithets and blistering denunciations that words can express. He proclaimed that this nation deserves and will receive, if it lets that decision stand, the hiss of man, the curse of God, and the ridicule of all ages. The times call for fire eaters, he argued, instead of conservatives, and he saw no merit in fellow African-American leaders teaching young men of our race that it is manly to sit under any such diabolical situation and decision. Close that letter with a strong prophetic warning. Now I ask, he wrote, shall we sit and be conservative, hold our peace, and submit to degradation? I hope not. We cannot afford to do it. No, not a member of the Negro race. If the decision is correct, the United States Constitution is a dirty rag, a cheat, a libel, and ought to be spit upon by every Negro in the land. More, if the decision is correct and accepted by this country, then prepare to return to Africa or get ready for a thorough examination. Well, 13 years later, Supreme Court laid all pretense aside and issued arguably one of the worst rulings in jurisprudence history, Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, that produced, of course, the Separate but Equal doctrine. Roughly about 89 before Congress attempted to issue another civil rights bill equaling that of the 1875. That, of course, will come in 1964. And just like Turner championing the 1875 Act, Martin Luther King Jr. championed the 1964 Act. In a speech, February 5th, 1964, delivered at Drew University, King called on, quote, men of goodwill and women of goodwill all over the nation to work with determination to see that this bill is passed and that the coalition in Congress made up of right-wing Northern Republicans and Southern Democrats will not again serve as a legislative incinerator that would burn to ashes this meaningful civil rights bill. In a speech May 29, 1964, King addressed the crowd in San Diego. In the speech, he invoked the memory of late President Kennedy. He told the audience it was on a sweltering afternoon last June, and a young and vigorous, intelligent, dedicated president stood before this nation and said in eloquent terms, the issue which we face in civil rights is not merely a political issue. It is at the bottom a moral issue. It is a question of whether we would treat our Negro brothers as we would like to be treated. And on the heels of this great speech, he went on to offer a civil rights package to Congress, the most comprehensive civil rights package ever presented by any president of our great nation. Further, he proclaimed it is urgent for the health of the nation for this civil rights bill to be passed. And it is necessary that in local communities and in states all over the nation to make civil rights legislation a reality and to make its firm enforcement a reality. It's delivered June 3rd, 1964 at Arizona State University, just as Bishop Turner invoked the death of Charles Sumner, of Senator Charles Sumner, King invoked the death of President Kennedy to argue for the bill's passage. He told the audience that the greatest tribute of respect that the United States of America could pay to the late President John F. Kennedy was to see the Civil Rights Bill passed without being watered down. Much lobbying and social movement direction facilitated by King and others. President Lyndon Johnson signed the bill into law July the 2nd, 1964. The act, which in a lot of ways mirrors the 1875 Civil Rights Act, enforces the constitutional right to vote, confers jurisdiction upon the district courts of the United States to provide injunctive relief against discrimination in public accommodations, to authorize the Attorney General to institute suits to protect constitutional rights in public facilities and public education, to extend the Commission on Civil Rights that was started back in 1957 with that small Civil Rights Act, to prevent discrimination in federally assisted programs, to establish a commission on the equal employment opportunity and for other purposes. In short, this act outlaws discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin, as well as strengthens the enforcement of voting rights and, yes, even the desegregation of schools. However, as we celebrate 60 years since it's became law, we find ourselves at a crossroads. Much of what the law was intended to do and protect is under attack right now. King and the social movement that surrounded him fought valiantly to pass the 64 Civil Rights Act. It was a long and protracted battle, but they finally saw it pass. It was this law that gave rise to the 65 Voting Rights Act and the 68 Fair Housing Act. For so long, we had believed that the 64 Act was settled law. But with conservative majorities at the Supreme Court and other federal and district courts throughout the country, of the civil rights law is being attacked. Civil rights attorney Alfonso David, writing for Fortune magazine, reminds us that the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race and color, religion, sex, national origin, was not passed in a vacuum. It was initially and expressly designed to remedy the history of unequal treatment that Black people experienced because of decades of abuse, bigotry, and subjugation. Conservative argument that racism has been solved and that the law expressly aimed at protecting Black people from racist acts and racism should now be, quote, race neutral. According to legal scholar Thomas Ross, the court engages in a legal rhetoric of race when they do this, that's embodied in two central themes, white innocence and Black abstraction. For Ross, white innocence is the insistence on the innocence or absence of responsibility to the contemporary white person, calling white innocence a rhetorically constructed myth. Ross argued that judges of the 19th century advanced this idea of white innocence in various ways. Of originalism and judicial helplessness, the rhetoric of white innocence, wrote Ross, permitted white magicians to pretend for themselves and for their white contemporaries that the horrific circumstances of the Black world, after all, not any white person's fault. In Black abstraction is the rhetorical depiction, he argues, of the Black person in an abstract context, outside of really any real or social context. Quote, Black abstraction and white innocence work together in the legal rhetoric to obscure the degradation of Blacks, to absolve the contemporary rights of responsibility for any images of degradation that might have passed through the filter of Black abstraction. Thus, these rhetorical themes made the choices of the 19th century judges, and I will argue many conservative justices today, intellectually coherent and smooth over the conflict between the reality of subjugation and the abstract principles of freedom and equality. Short, by not placing African Americans in context or by framing ideas without ascribing to context or the contextual variance that shapes the rhetoric itself, the court is paving the way for states to continue to enact a series of laws that separate citizens based on race. And we can see it now all over because it never stays contained. Therefore, in conclusion, we examine the civil rights acts in history, we can note two things. First, none of these acts would have become law had it not been for people pushing for its passage. In other words, when the country saw fit to move on civil rights, it was associated with a movement. The color conventions and what remained of the abolitionist movement helped propel the 1866 and the 1875 Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was propelled by the Civil Rights Movement that, of course, featured King. The country had never moved to do anything so monumental as to enshrine civil rights into the fabric of our society without a movement. Second, after these bills became law, there was an immediate backlash. Sometimes the backlash was swift. For instance, conservatives nullified the 1866-1875 Civil Rights Act at every turn. The resistance was so bad that after the 75 law, remember, it only took 8 years for the Supreme Court to call it unconstitutional. And I would argue today, as we sit here celebrating and commemorating on this King Day, we are now engulfed in a backlash from the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It started, of course, when King and the movement itself. The backlash to King and the movement's success was so bad that King later in his life no longer believed that government officials would, quote, do the right thing. This, of course, led King to call for a campaign of massive disobedience that would lead to economic boycotts and shutdowns of entire cities. He called for people to demand to be heard by putting their bodies on the line and to face jail willingly. He argued that The protest needed to be huge to compel the government to act. It needed to be massive. It needed to be massively confronted with the power structure and to dramatize the situations. He argued that this was the only response left for a recalcitrant Congress that would bring issues out into the open. Faced with increasing hostility to him and the movement, along with the rise in the backlash that eventually would give birth to Nixon's silent majority coalition, King knew that more suasion would not give him the results that he had hoped. Thus, King began a campaign grounded in nonviolence that aimed to force the government to act on behalf of the movement. And that movement, called the Poor People's Campaign. It's within this spirit that we can understand better the attacks today on DEI initiatives, critical race theory, voting rights, and the like. Without context, nothing matters. So on this MLK Day, just like the people did back in the 19th century, just like they did in the 20th century, we need to come together in the 21st century to keep the gains we have all made. It's going to take a movement of people who value freedom, a movement of people understand and realize the rights that we enjoy could be taken away at any moment. A movement of people who see that the backlash is real, sustained, and not letting up. A movement of people who know that we cannot stand still or stay pat with what we have. With history being hijacked, diversity diluted, equity eradicated, and inclusion isolated, we cannot stand still. We owe it to those who fought to get us here. We now must continue to fight for those coming behind us. Thank you.
Thank you. Guess we can open this up to questions. I have one. How do you maintain hope through all of this?
Sometimes I don't. I have to be honest. My hope is grounded in the community understanding where we are. And if the community can understand where we are realistically, and then we can band together and begin to work from that vantage point, I'm okay, because I really don't think, to be perfectly honest, I really don't think anything will change in the immediate future. I just need to be around some people who will hold me close, who will walk with me, who will pray with me, who will be in community with me, who will be, who will laugh with me, who will cry with me, who will mourn, who will celebrate with me. And if we can just do that, I don't need the utopia or the Pollyannish type of hope. I need what King will call a realistic hope. The hope that still calls for all of us to push through, but we're not pushing through by ourselves, we're pushing through together. So that what gives me. This gives me hope in this Zoom, that I feel that I am part of a larger community that will help me along the way.
Thank you. I need all the community hope I can hear.
I have a question. This terrible catastrophe of guns is so, it flies in the face of anything that makes sense. And of course, we call our legislators, we write letters, we sign petitions, and just this morning, people got shot again. How can we do something? How can we make this horrible thing go away? How can we save people's lives? Thank you.
Yes, I have been, I'm here in Tennessee, and it is a huge issue here. And I am on a campaign now, actually. I'm glad this question came up. I am literally on a campaign. What we must do is we cannot continue to voting. And what I mean by that is that I'm not talking about the people who somehow don't vote right. Even though we need to increase, voting all over, people need to get registered and vote. I am directly talking and aiming my movement to people who will vote, who continue to vote, who continue to vote for the same people who would not do anything about what you just talked about guns. We cannot do that anymore. You are part of the problem. I have called for, it sounds crazy, but I have called for a national day of confession just on our voting habits. Like, I have been part of the problem. I have voted for people who, when I go and try to talk to them reasonably, they look at me and tell me it. I know in Tennessee, last year we had the terrible shooting in the Nashville area. And, if you've been following Tennessee politics, the two Justins and State Representative Gloria Johnson got literally, kicked out, out of the House and all of that. And right in that same time frame, a massive shooting happened at an elementary school. And so those people who have voted for those politicians thought that they just could go up there and just say, hey, we want to have some type of legislation. They looked them in the face and told them no. So, okay, that's back on us now, I think. Okay, I can't vote for you no more. I cannot support you anymore. As a matter of fact, I am going to support the other person who at least going to give me an audience that at least be sympathetic to my needs. So that's where we are. It is clear to me that we simply cannot continue to vote for folk who do not believe that guns are an issue, period. We just cannot. No matter your party, we're talking about conservative or progressive ideas, because parties flip-flop over and over, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. It's the ideology behind it that I'm concerned about. And so if you're constantly voting for people that tell you each and every step along the campaign trail that the guns are not the problem, people are, okay, they're letting us know who they are. We should act accordingly.
Do you think there's any way that the pro-life community could be, I don't know, encouraged to get behind this? Because if that's not life and death, I don't know what is.
I think so. I think you can probably, a few of them may, but I think, now you make me put on my political hat. I think that you'll have more, I hate to use the word success, but it's the best word here. You will have more success talking with conservative voters who may have children, who work in schools and in those places where that mass shootings can happen, that actually understand. But yeah, the question that needs to be put before the election, and it should just be a real clear: do you want gun legislation or not? If you want gun legislation, vote for me. If you don't, you can vote for that. That's exact. It should just be so clear, so clear. And you should be able to talk to your friends and talk to relatives who are still voting that one way, and just tell them that you are part of the problem. You help exacerbate this problem, continue this problem. And so that, I'm glad you allowed me a few minutes to talk about this, because this is something I am really trying to build momentum for here in Tennessee. We're pushing hard. We're going to be pushing in this electoral season, and just trying to just say straight up, I'm not even trying to persuade. I am just really trying to present and bear witness. Because you're going to do what you're going to do, but you need to know I think the power will come in letting people know that if you continue to vote the way that you've been voting, you are contributing to the party. You have blood on your hands as well. Not just the politicians. Voters have blood on their hands.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for allowing me to kind of unpack that. Yeah, I think, Barry, yeah.
Since you're on the topic of voting, I want to ask you, I almost want to ask you how to talk to teenagers, but what I really want to ask you is how to talk to young voters, because
Yeah.
I have two daughters, both of whom will be old enough to vote in the 2024 presidential election. And I hear from a lot of their friends, a kind of disillusionment with the whole process that makes them not want to engage at all. And
Right.
I think that this is a big problem, that kind of, it's a, passive culpability. And so, but specifically how to talk to them when they feel like no one represents their interests.
One of the ways that I have done it, and this is by no means, I have not taken this to a large scale, to any large scale type of research or anything like that. But here in Tennessee on the ground, we do two things. Number one, we speak about the issues that are germane to young people. So if it's a college age young person, student loans, those type of issues are important. But beyond that, what we discovered as you can see my backdrop, I am contractually obligated from the press to talk about the summer of 2020. So but it's coming out in March. What we discovered in our research when doing this book, the summer of 2020, we have a chapter in there on politics. And how to get young people involved in the political process, we discovered, and I think it can be backed up and maybe need to be a larger study, but get them involved in a movement. The movement matters. Because if you are involved in a movement, if you go out to a protest or you stand on a street corner or you write, or you do a letter writing campaign, or you doing getting it on social media, retweeting, or whatever you're doing that makes you a part of that movement. The very next thing that most people do is to start asking these questions. Why is this? Why, what? I thought this was already taken care of. I thought this, and then all of a sudden, they are realizing that the movement as strong as its partners in elected officials, in elected capacity. Sooner or later, in order to get anything changed, you will need to have a partner or at least somebody you can reason with that will meet you halfway in an executive office that can actually sign legislation. And so, same thing with the civil rights bills and the civil rights acts, the same thing with any of these type of bills. So that's how they get involved, because what I tell people all the time, the low-hanging fruit on movements and social movement is just casting a vote. That's casting, getting up and actually going to the polling place, or in some states, you can mail it in. You don't have to leave your house. That's the low hang. If you're going to be part of the movement, you owe it to. Matter of fact, in our interviews with activists, many of them just said that you cannot be part of a movement and not vote unless you are, you have lost your right to vote. But you cannot be a part of the movement and not vote, because that is the low-hanging fruit. So I am pushing all young people to get involved somewhere. Get involved in a movement. Show up on the street corner, hold up a sign. You cannot do that and not ask the questions of why am I out here holding up a sign? Because people will ask you that. And then you will have to do the research and you will have to find out. And you're like, oh, okay. What I need to do, I got to go to the State House now and persuade my legislators. Oh, okay, I can do that. Oh, they don't want to do that. Oh, I got to vote. I got to organize. And I got to organize all my friends to vote. And that's how. At least the research says.
Thank you.
You. Sister Wood, you're on me.
I just was going to offer a couple of other thoughts. Every community has an election board. There are polling places where people need help handing out flyers during election periods. And prior to elections, there's always a Republican or Democratic team that needs somebody to go knock on doors and pass out flyers. So those are all ways in a local community, young people can become involved. And I would also hope to think that there are civics courses offered in high school that open the doors to these students so that they think about some of these issues that are, on the table momentarily, right? I don't know whether it's worse in the South than it is in the North, but I know our education is not equal in most of these schools.
That's right. That is absolutely right. And so that's what we have seen when activists get involved first in a movement. And then they say, oh, what can I do to help elect a person that we can talk to and reason with? Oh, yeah, come on to this meeting and we're going to try to put the team together. We're going out canvassing, or we're going out and talking to the voters. We're signing up people. We're doing this, that, and the other. And that's how that starts. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Another question?
Other questions?
I'll ask another question. Do you feel that there is a difference between the North and the South still in regard to discrimination because of color? I do.
Wow.
I do. And that's personally because I've been in the South. That's where my husband came from. And he came from Alabama. So I saw some of the worst of it in the 60s. And it's better, but it's still not quite like it is in the North. I don't know whether you agree with that or not, but
I can see why some would take that position, but I am more Malcolm X on this topic. He once said that anything south of Canada, anything south of Canada is the South. So, when we talk about racism in its totality, for instance, even the 1866 and 75 bills originated, of course, with several states still rebelling against losing the Civil War. But many northern states, just as racist and just as segregated in many places than southern cities. Even King himself, when he went to Chicago in '66, said that it was the most violent and racist place he had ever been. They tried to kill him there. And so he was understanding that it might be, as you say, a little bit easier. I can see where that may be. There's some people in certain places and spaces where certain folk can enjoy certain amenities and stuff, but at its root and at its core, I'm looking at cities like Philadelphia, for instance, Boston, Minneapolis, Chicago, Cincinnati, and a host of other cities where some of the most violent and vitriol acts of racism have happened. And, I would like to just remind, people from time to time, sometimes on social media that, if something happened like the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, just generally remind that, hey, Minneapolis is not in the South. And so, there was this great article, I wish I could think of the title that I recently read, that maybe give an understanding of this. And it's about how Confederates left the South and went all around the country. Left the South, but brought with them their, quote, Southern ways.
Right.
And so other states, like Oregon, for instance, becomes a state and just literally banned by just like, hey, how you do that? I mean, so you only do that if you have some folk that, wanted to do that, and usually they're all from the South. So yeah, I can see where in some spaces and instances, places, it might be just a tad bit better, but overall, it is the entire country. It is just the entire country. And this is why we need to come together as community to resist the pushback that we're getting now on the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because if that falls, everything else that comes behind it that was built upon it
Right.
will fall as well too.
Well,
And that's what we are.
thank you for pointing out some of the northern occurrences of bad things. And I think that the migration from the south westward changed that mixture in the 20th century. And there are places that people are just not adjusted. I grew up in Manhattan, so you get a little jaded there. Everybody that's so integrated with so many people that you just take every color for granted, and you're all friends, except for bad shootings, right?
Okay. I have a raised hand from.
Yes, I'm from Christ. Could you talk a little bit about the intersection of the original civil rights movement and the prison industrial complex? The re-enslavement?
We talk about like the 64 movement,
Well, so
yeah.
So the very fact that the original 1866 law allowed for the re-enslavement of people if they had a criminal record seems to me to have a direct line to what is happening today.
Thank you for that, because this is the problem, ladies and gentlemen, of compromise. The 66 bill follows the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was just ratified in December of 1865, and it has that same clause, right? Unless I'm duly convicted of a crime or whatever. So it was trying to follow that, and that came in those debates. When you follow the legislative debates, that was the compromise. Like, okay, we would not have involuntarily slavery, except. And so now the courts have kind of, sometimes looked at that in certain ways that have been positive, like the elimination of chain gangs and stuff like that. But then in the real sense, as you just mentioned, it is really still going on today. I forget the number, but we have a lot of our products, a lot of the services, call centers are done with prison labor. And they are not getting paid a fair wage. They're not even getting paid minimum wage. And here's the trick part about all of that even if it was a work program, you would think that if when they are released, they would be able to work in the industry they've been working on while in prison, but you can't even get a job doing what you've been doing. And why would a company want to hire somebody and pay them more wage when I could just pay prison? So yes, that has been a huge issue and a huge problem, and many people who work in the prison industrial complex and who worked in those movements have been trying to get that eliminated from the 13th Amendment, or even going with another constitutional amendment, which would be hard in these days and times to get 2/3 of the states to be pretty much anything, and trying to just mitigate that. That was part of compromise. That was just a part of the compromise in order to get bills passed. 1875 bill, for instance, the compromise was to strike out the desegregation of schools. And so that was stricken out. And of course, we know what happened until 1953. So compromise sometimes only backs of people that are directly affected happens in this country. And this is why I have always said that the movement should be continual, that we should continue to take small victories when we can, but not to rest, to continue to build and to continue to move, because there's always, even with that, there's always backlash and people trying to nullify those amendments. And one could argue that in the 20th century, the late 19th, 20th century, it's did.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I don't know if we have time for one more question because our next speaker should be coming along in a few minutes.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to share this morning on King Day. And I am indeed grateful and thankful and honored to share space with you. I am a much better person because I have met some of you and been in this space. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.